والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه وبارك وسلم. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah. Can I just ask everyone to move up a bit? So people are going to trickle in, and then we want to keep a pathway open so everyone is able to join. They're not praying like in the corners of the room. So if we can move in closer, that would be great. So when we wrapped up last time, we were talking about a key moment in the Seerah that takes place now after the companions have left from Mecca to go to Abyssinia. They're sent to seek sanctuary from the Najashi, Christian king at that time, who we said was amongst those that the Prophet ﷺ made janazah for. He prayed uniquely a funeral prayer in absentia for this man, who is said to have converted to Islam during his time as the Negus of Abyssinia. We talked about some of the wisdoms of that, but what was happening now in Mecca simultaneously were things that were of great importance. So after the second migration, Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As, Amr ibn al-As, he is sent by the Quraysh, he's not Muslim at this time, to go to Abyssinia to bring the Muslims back to Mecca. The only reason to continue to make life difficult for them. And he fails at that, right? They don't bring them back from Abyssinia until the 7th year after Hijrah. There are Muslims that are still in Abyssinia before they return back to Medina. One of the things that happens after the failure of Amr ibn al-As to bring these Muslims back from Abyssinia is shortly thereafter, Hamza radiallahu an, the uncle of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he becomes Muslim. We talked about the circumstances around Hamza's conversion. We spoke about how he was close in age to the Prophet ﷺ, and that they were milk brothers, that they were both nursed by the same woman who was the emancipated servant of the Prophet's uncle, who had the news of the birth of his nephew. He set her free and told her to nurse the Prophet's himself, right? This woman by the name of Thuwayba. And we said that Hamza was known amongst his people. He was nomadic, he was an adventurer, he was a hunter, and how his conversion to Islam came through a moment where Abu Jahl had attacked the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, near the mountain of Safa. And when Hamza was returning from his own hunt, he was met by one of the servants of a man by the name of Abdullah bin Jada'an, who said, "Do you know what happened to your nephew today?" Right? People remember what we were saying. This becomes now a critical point in the Muslim experience, as well as within the Seerah, because they're able to now find clout through these individuals. Before we start to move forward, one of the other things that's coming here is that Hamza ibn Abdul Muttalib is the uncle of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And we've met other key family members of the Messenger of God in this kind of prophetic biography, but the elders amongst them quite often are not at the early group of actually becoming Muslim. So Ali ibn Abi Talib, radiallahu anh, who is the Prophet ﷺ's cousin, he's Abu Talib's son, he's in a place where he is amongst the very first who become Muslim. The Prophet, who was born without a father, his father Abdullah passes before he's in this world. His mother dies at a young age. His grandfather dies at a young age. Hamza radiallahu an, he now is unique in that even though they're close in age and they have that camaraderie, he's still the Prophet's uncle. And he's one of now these first who, unlike Abu Talib, he converts to Islam. And aside from what it brings in terms of strength and all kinds of things that we talked about, if you remember last time, we were talking about stories of Hamza radiallahu an, but we juxtaposed this to sayings that the Prophet ﷺ, his companions, the Salaf, they had around a concept called marua, masculinity. Like, what does it mean to be a man in Islam? And people remember, right? And there was a lot that was there that was speaking about good character and forbearance and kindness and crying. Like the Prophet was shedding tears at his mother's grave, and the people around him started to cry too. Sufyan al-Thawri talked about how there was weakness in one's masculinity if they weren't able to control their gaze when a woman walked by them, right? And he gave the example of you walk down the street in New York, you can't not see like a man who's just checking out a woman in these grotesque, atrocious ways, right? May Allah protect us from this. But the deepening in an understanding of who Hamza radiallahu anh was, not just in terms of his honor and his valor and his dignity, but thinking about it now as a turning point also in the Prophet ﷺ's relationship to his prophethood. Yes, it's meaningful every single time one of these people converts because they're only existing now in the dozens still, right? There's 2 billion of us today, subhanAllah, and over 1,400 years of lived century, there's been an exponential amount in comparison to the number of us today. But in that first phase of revelation, we're only in year 5 of revelation at this point. It's not that every single day, like there's literally in this community, we get about 2 to 5 people a week who are taking their shahada, mashallah, right? It's at a pace where there's a large number of people converting. You can do the math. If there's 2 to 5 people a week converting, right? Let's say even on the low end of that average, it's 2 a week. That's 104 people a year, right? So within 5 years, if they were even going at 2 people a week, you would be in a place where you would have had 520 Muslims at that time. They didn't have that many, you know? So each person brings their own unique identity and their uniqueness. But this is the first of the elders in his family who is engaging him in this way, who has this close bond, you know? And you start to think about affirmation, what it means to gain validation from the people around you. Also in being able to recognize very uniquely a nuanced experience that some of us in the room can relate to and some of us in the room cannot relate to. The Prophet had family members who were not Muslim. Every single person in that first phase is in a place where they are experiencing conversion to Islam and dealing with the reality of being ideologically, philosophically, religiously, however you want to qualify it, in a space where their family does not buy into what it is that they do. They're not all on the same page. They have to keep it in secret. They can't do certain things all together. It's bearing impact now, straining relationships. There's challenges that are surfacing as a result of this. There's some of you in the room who can recognize and relate to this idea of what it's like to be in a family where you might be the only Muslim in the family, and where people fundamentally might not necessarily understand the nuance of this. The Prophet of God has a lot of family that's not Muslim. And now his uncle, Hamza radiallahu anh, becomes Muslim. What must that experientially feel like? not in terms of validation or affirmation of prophethood, but just on a very human, emotional level. And why we want to be able to think about this is because one of the frames in which we're looking at the Seerah literature is that the Seerah makes the Quran concrete. Islam is about reality. The access points to this lived experience cannot be myopic that says every single thing has some connection point to me. But through this, we can also understand the development of empathy that says, hey, I might not know what it's like to be born and not have a father, right? My father is still alive, alhamdulillah. But you read the prophetic biography and you realize, at a minimum, there's people who don't have their father in their lives. There's people who don't have either of their parents. The prophet lost his mother by the time he was 6 years of age. And you want to read this also in a sense where, from a religious standpoint, knowing the prophet is an avenue to building love for the prophet. But having a love that cannot be something that is at its 50% or 60% acquisition. A real love is a love that doesn't necessitate me having to be like you in order for me to love you, but I can love you to your fullest because I love the parts of you that remind me of me as well as the things that have nothing to do with me. And a critical moment in this part of the Seerah is rooted in the fact that the Prophet has a family member that is his elder that has now converted to Islam. And for a lot of people, that's like a strong desire that they have. That's a strong wish that they have. It's a dua they make in every single prayer that, Ya Allah, give hidayah to my family members also. And you know what the struggle is when you don't see eye to eye with the people who are closest to you or caretakers of you. And so, in recognizing that if you are in a place where you have an immense amount of joy when somebody takes their shahada, but you still remember that, hey, on the day of Eid, who's that person celebrating with? I was super ecstatic, but a generation from now, you don't want to replicate behaviors that don't make any sense and say that by virtue of differences that are outward or external, that we don't share space together. So when you're choosing to invite people into your homes, you're choosing who it is you're going to break meals and fasts with, who it is that you invite to gatherings. The sharing of this cannot be limited now to a sense that metrics of popularity or success are based off of numbers or who we simply let in, but also who we are keeping out. The Prophet wants to have people in his family also become Muslim, but he has to deal with the reality that guidance comes from Allah. How would you know what it's like for someone who lives this every day of their life if you've never sat down to actually share a space with someone like that? And you're going to have continuity to this as a theme in the Seerah. When we say it, it's not meant to be a platitude or something that we use as a marketing point. Islam is for all people. But you're seeing in the earliest groupings of people, people are coming from diverse backgrounds, but also the uniqueness now of the emotional experiences that get attached to some of these things. That you have to give up sometimes a lot in order to be Muslim, not just in terms of when I pray in this room, but when you have to choose to be Muslim outside of the time of your 5 daily prayers. And that struggle that comes up is something that becomes quite important to understand. And it fills now a certain gap that the Prophet ﷺ is in a place where this gift comes to him also, the gift of his uncle embracing Islam. You can't meet people with an absence of empathy because people will say all kinds of things that don't make any sense. I'll give you a parallel example of a young woman who had come to see me, quite state of disarray. She had family members who struggled with various mental wellness conditions, and in particular, the kind of aggressive, hostile nature of her mother was so extreme that her father, who had to absorb all of the hostility of her mother, who was unwilling to seek help for her mental health conditions, now got to a place where he could no longer absorb a lot of what it was that he was carrying. And she came to see me because she said, I just went to the hospital where I saw my father laying in a hospital bed because he had engaged in acts of self-harm as a result of carrying all of this pain. And the thing that she was being challenged by wasn't just visually seeing her father in this way, but she said the first 2 or 3 people that I spoke to who were friends of mine who were Muslim, when I shared this with them, the first thing that they said to me was, well, doesn't your dad know that suicide is haram? But there's no semblance of empathy. There's no real sensibility of who is it that I'm talking to, rather that I'm just talking at you. The words don't really resonate because you're not connecting at a level that says this is a whole person. And when you think about moments like this, like joy and contentment that the Prophet must have felt where his uncle became Muslim, think about what the days were like when that wasn't the case. And when you're making determinations and decisions about how it is that you relate to people around you, you start to recognize that there's fundamentally things that I just can't understand. The only way that I can relate is through empathy. And if we were to define empathy, it is the complete suspension of the nafs, the ego, the lower self, and everything that feeds and fuels it. And I only understand the experience of the other through their lived experience, not through mine. You wonder sometimes why nobody gets what it is that you're saying. Sometimes it can be frustrating, but sometimes you got to take a step back and say, maybe they don't understand what I'm talking about because I'm not really talking to them. I'm talking to them, but in reality, in what makes sense to me, not what it is that makes sense to them. I'm not mindful of the experience. Does that make sense? And it can extend now to other demographics, right? Like, what does it mean in terms of being somebody who comes from a diverse array of identity points? Other things that we want to be able to see, because we're going to now today talk about the conversion of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anh, who 3 days after Hamza radiallahu anh becomes Muslim, Umar becomes Muslim. And it's a game changer. The combination of these two, individually alone, but the combination together, especially at this critical time, is something that's deeply impactful. But what we see through all of these experiences, even in the handful of people that we're speaking to, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, radiallahu anh, right? We have the reality of his narrative that we've talked about. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, radiallahu anh. We have talked about him. Hamza ibn Abdul Muttalib, radiallahu anh. We talked about Sumayya, radiallahu ta'ala anha. We talk about her family. They're the martyrs, the first ones, do you know? We talk about recognitions of their individual narratives and their stories and what it is that they're going through. None of them are the same, right? If Hamza radiallahu anh is offering something unique at this moment, it means that he is different from the other people who were there in that generation thus far at that time. Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, when we talk about the migration to Abyssinia, he is chosen to speak to the Najashi because of certain criteria that they deem to pick him. Salama narrates hadith about what it was like, the anxiety that they're feeling, that the king has called them, and they were trying to just stay under the radar. None of them are the same. They share La ilaha illallah, but La ilaha illallah doesn't then require them to suddenly mold into a homogenous group of individuals. Have we spoken about any of these people in their singularity in a way that they just suddenly blended into one archetypal person? No. Hamza radiallahu an, Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu an. We're going to talk about Umar today, and we talked about Hamza. In our understanding, Hamza radiallahu an as well as Umar radiallahu an, they mentioned the realities that they had and challenges with khamr. They would drink alcohol. We talked about Hamza radiallahu an. We don't have a lot of narrations of hadith from him and Quran that he was like teaching and instructing. That's not what he brought to those people. He brought like a sense of what it means to be a good Muslim man, nobility, dignity, chivalry, valor, but still had struggles with things. But they have a opportunity to embrace the religion and still have their unique personas, their unique personalities, their unique demeanors, their unique strengths, their unique non-strengths. You see what I mean? When you picture these people in your head, we're going to talk about it today. How old do you think Umar ibn al-Khattab is when you think about him in your head? Because if the Prophet was 40 when he received revelation, how many years is he now, 5 years into revelation? Right? It's not a trick question. 40 plus 5 is what? 45. Great. Yeah, well done. Hamza radiallahu an is older than him, even if they're close in age. Then how old is Hamza?
47, 48.
Yeah. We know he's older than 45, right? Umar radiallahu an, when you picture him in your head, how old do you think he is?
In his early 20s.
Umar, when revelation came, was in his early 20s. When he converts, he's like in his mid to late 20s. He's younger than some of you in this room. A lot of these people are coming to Islam when they're 17, 18. Some of them are older, some of them are younger, right? Ali radiallahu an, people say he never converted to Islam because he was so young when he embraced the religion. As a child, he was just always considered to be Muslim. But at this juncture, when there's now a shift in terms of just what they can do from the presence of these people, it can't get lost in our minds that they exist in this monolithic lump, that they all suddenly became the same. A methodology that teaches us to not see text in relation to context, or adopts what is a sense that you become Muslim and you suddenly just blur into one kind of common culture or one kind of unique individual experience. Everybody across the board, 14 centuries of lived tradition from all kinds of racial, cultural, ethnic backgrounds, it just fundamentally doesn't make any sense, right? But that's how a lot of us think about Islam. That to be a good Muslim, we all are exactly the same. But they brought their uniqueness to this, and the Prophet knew how to plug them in based off of their individual circumstances, not just what a kind of communal collective experience was. That doesn't always necessarily become the case. You see what I mean? Does that make sense? How many times do you go into a Muslim space and you feel unfamiliar because you feel as if you have to be like everybody else in order to be there. Or where there's limitations. You don't want to have kind of simplistic understanding. But when religion is a sociological experience and communities are rooted in now sociological commonalities, right? We crave similarity and familiarity. So you look for people who share culture with you and language with you and the kind of customs, etc. There's nothing wrong with this. You don't want to have limited understandings that everything is just good or bad. That's not how everything can always be measured. But when you get to certain spaces now where the commonality is this familiarity and similarity, and you go into a place that's a house of God, but nobody in the space is like you. And I have to now forego parts of myself in order to be. I have to feign that I am engaged at some level of practice or religiosity or the lack thereof, right? Because it goes in both directions. The number of people that I've sat with in this community who have said that I feel uncomfortable that I'm the only one that prays in certain places, as if that when I get up to pray, everyone's looking at me like, you do this thing? Or on the other end of the spectrum, that if I struggle with this, like I'm not on top of something in terms of ritual and practice, but everyone around me is, I have to somehow be just like them in order to be with them. That's not what these people are experiencing. 5 years in, they're in a place where they've gone through real difficulty. They've made immense sacrifices for the sake of their religion, but they're still saying we're in this together, and our togetherness is not rooted in us pretending like we are all the same person, but that we can recognize the individual value that each individual diversely brings. And they're not saying we compromise on what religion tells us to do. So that inclusivity is that we now turn this religion into making God submissive to us. That's not what they're saying. The person who struggles with something, they still let them struggle with something. The person who comes from a lower class or a noble class, the person who's from the elite, or the person who has no lineage that's known, and everyone in between. But it's to stress the idea that if they were suddenly to all have a uniformity in identity, none of the people we've talked about so far have a uniformity in identity, right? Is Hamza radiallahu an like Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu an? No, they're not. They're very different. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud tries to read Quran publicly. He's the first one to read it publicly, right? And we repeat these things so they stick in your head that you start to think about them. Allah gave you intellectual capacity not to mute it or not to just memorize dates and names, but to be able to take it and then be informed in what you do in your day-to-day with it, right? Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, they beat him when he recites Surah Rahman out loud in front of the Kaaba, first public recitation. Hamza radiallahu an, he can walk right up to Abu Jahl and smack him in the head, and nobody does anything to him. They're not the same. And Islam is not meant to somehow make them believe that that's the goal of practicing this religion. Nor are they meant to look at each other in a way that bears any type of condescension in any capacity. It's just you are you and I am me, and we can still be sisters and brothers from these different experiences and backgrounds and embrace who it is that we are individually. That is not the same as a rugged individualism that is breeded through whiteness and supremacy, that now idolizes the self in a modern day form of shirk, and in egocentricity says, I am the center of everything. Because they can still convene together as a collective without letting go of who it is that they are, but the sphere that they engage in has God centered. not the self-centered. Do you see what I mean? That's why it's called being self-centered, right? Because you have now said, I am at the center of all of it. Versus we are all in a sphere of interdependence, and I don't need you to be like me in order for us to all be together. Do you get what I'm saying? Does that make sense? Okay. What I'd like for us to do, let's take a pause. And if you turn to the person's next to you, talk it out a little bit. What is it bringing up for you? Because this is now rooted not in just rhetorical, kind of tokenizing conversations on belonging. But the basis of this is a universal tradition that is now at a place where it's going to start to build a different form of momentum. And in that momentum structure necessitates understanding that somewhere along the line, this idea shifted. So here, you can see that at the onset of it, when the Prophet is bringing people to La ilaha illallah, he's not saying La ilaha illallah and you all have now to suddenly become this homogeneous lump of something or the other, right? But La ilaha illallah, and it infuses where you are in your world, where you are at this moment in your life. Do you see what I'm saying? So let's turn to the persons next to us, share some thoughts, like what is it bringing up for you? And then we'll come back and discuss, inshallah. Go ahead.
Not here, Dan. I'm just working on the program. Just like half an hour. So, yes. Yeah. So whatever you did.
I don't know. I think that's what I'm getting at. Like, that's kind of flavor like some underground, some underlying like in here in London, it's a life, right? Like, it's not so with the hands. We always use like, if you ever see like the cover and also the side, like there's a skirt. It's not a woman very much of that. But in here, I just realized, oh, there's a lot of great it's not have to be like the one that I see. It's like like everyone comes from different places. There's no right or wrong. It's like as long as you follow the rules. Cover your own. Okay. I don't need to be different. I think some people are teaching like it's like to like do all those things, but like really like I think you're saying like not being like really necessarily like hard to color you know yeah.
Okay, so what are some of the things that are coming up for everyone? What are you discussing? What are you taking away so far? Who wants to start? What do we discuss? Do you want to hug anyone else? It's okay. We're not really doing anything right now.
Sorry.
What do we discuss?
We had a lot of points, but can you repeat the prompt?
Just tell me what you talked about. It's okay. You forgot what you talked about already?
No, remember, but like, what was the question?
Well, anything that you came up with, what did you discuss? What did it bring up for you?
I mean, we were kind of talking about like how to help people out who come to you with problems, whether they're people you know or strangers. And it's like I feel like a lot of people maybe try to like produce solutions for like their friends or like family, and like it like we were kind of talking, it never hurts to like lead with empathy because you don't know if people want to be heard or they want like a solution, you know. And if they are like more solution oriented, then you can like try to like provide that for them. And also another thing is like I was kind of mentioning, I feel like Islam is like very anecdotal. We have like Quran, Hadith, so like if someone's going through something, it's like really comforting to know like if they went through that too. But like saying, oh, this is my solution, might not apply to them. So like I just type back again.
Yeah, and that's where solution orientation can become limiting, but it's a knee-jerk reaction for a lot of us because we don't know how to deal with people's discomfort always. You know, people have this idea that religion or being religious means that you have to say that you're okay when you're not, right? Someone says, how are you? You have to say, I'm fine, even if you're not doing okay, you know? But our religion doesn't say that. Or many of the spaces that you frequent throughout the course of your day, you can't fundamentally say you're struggling with something or something stresses you out. If someone asks you how you are at work and you start to say, well, like life actually is tough right now, they're like, well, hold on a second. What are you talking about? But the solution orientation is when I don't know what to do with my own anxiety around what you're feeling. Even if I care about you, I need to silence mine while still supporting you. I'm just going to say, well, why don't you try this or do that? Sometimes there's nothing to do. Sometimes you just have to be there to hold what the other person is carrying so they don't have to carry it by themselves and feel more isolated, right? And it ties into this idea of belonging. How can I let you carry what I'm holding if I have to somehow pretend in order to be in your space to begin with? Do you get what I mean? Right? Like I have to just kind of come with a sense of losing a part of my identity. This is why we have, like, why do we have hadith? Why do we have prophetic teachings that tell us things that if there's three of us in a place and two of us can understand a language and one cannot, that like you don't speak the language that the other person can't understand. Do you know? Just talk in English. Everybody understands English. Do you see what I mean? If somebody can't speak English, that's different, right? Why do we have a sign interpreter at Jummah? Because there's some people who they can't hear. Do you know? And we're not saying to that sign interpreter, like, well, all of us can't understand sign language, so this is a problem. No, like that's not what that means, right? That's not what that means. So some people can only speak Spanish. Some people can only speak Urdu. Some people can only speak Arabic. Some people can only speak Swahili. Like, it's fine. But a lot of us can also speak something else, and then we leave people out. Why is this important? Like, you come and sit here Mondays, Wednesdays, Jummah, whatever else. You can't have a sense of complacency with what we have here, right? I met this guy from California earlier this week, and he said the first time he came to the IC was on Eid in Washington Square Park. How many of you have done Eid in Washington Square Park with us? Like this last Eid or after Ramadan. It's really nice, right? There's like so many people. You know, where do they even come from, right? And it literally goes from the arch all the way to the end of the park. We're from 5th Street, whatever that would be, 6th Street, to 4th Street. Like, that's a lot of, like, distance, do you know? And it's not like, you know, the entirety around the fountain is filled. And this guy sat with me, and he said, I was surprised. One, I don't necessarily pray Eid outdoors. I was like, you're from California. Like, what are you talking about? He's like, we pray inside in these air-conditioned buildings. I was like, what a waste of California. You know what I mean? It is like sticky, gross hot here. And you come from a place where it's always 70 degrees. And you're playing, you know, I didn't say all of that. But he said what was surprising to me, other than what it was like to pray outside, he said, I'm not from here and I didn't know any of these people, but I just felt like this is where I was supposed to be. That's what a gathering of the divine is meant to do. Allah's gatherings are about principles of inclusivity, not exclusivity. And you have to be able to connect it to what it is that we've been looking at from the Seerah since last September. These are people who lived entire lives. Their embrace of Islam was not predicated on the notion that, like, yeah, you have to change certain things when you become Muslim or start to become more practicing or whatever else. But nobody is not a work in progress. But it also isn't like extreme that you suddenly leave behind everything that you are and become this like one big lump of stuff. The beauty of it is in recognizing that we all are different from each other, not that we're all same. Does that make sense? And we want to like understand this as a constant theme going forward, because even at the end of it, when they come at the conquest of Mecca, there's companions who remember Uhud. They remember the loss of Uhud, right? And they have carried within them now for years. There's companions who are on the record as saying that they go into Mecca, La Quraysh ba'da al-yawm. There's going to be no Quraysh after today. Because the expectation is that they're going to get what's owed to them for the losses they had at Uhud. The Prophet just said, everybody's forgiven today. And then he named specific houses. The family of so-and-so is forgiven. The family of so-and-so is forgiven, right? That takes a lot to create belonging in that sense. Do you see what I mean? And it's limiting. It's not a problem. Like my great-great-great-grandfather, if he was Muslim, he probably didn't speak English. So he would need a space that he could still resonate in as much as I would need a space that I could resonate in. Sometimes it has to be either or when there's 2 billion of us. But to see that as like the goal and then necessitate you have to become me in order to be with me, none of them are like the others. It doesn't mean that they're like weirdly different, but they get to be themselves. Do you understand? They get to, and within that, they have their own temperaments and demeanors, but they also have their own struggles, right? They're going through their own stuff. And we talk about Umar in a little bit, why a lot of people like really resonate with his story is not because of just like his strength and courage and whatever else, but who he was before Islam was very different than who he was after Islam. And we can resonate with the idea that there's a lot of people who tell us why we can't belong and that there's nothing good within us and we wouldn't have any right to have a relationship with God. But this narrative creates like a very deep needed precedent that even nobody believes that you have anything good within you. It doesn't matter. Like Allah is the one who validation you are seeking. And nobody thought there was anything in this man, the son of Al-Khattab, except Allah's messenger and Allah himself. You see what I'm saying? Does that make sense? And so we want to understand this through this prism of like what it means to actually belong and be a part of it. Any other thoughts before we move on? If you're here for the Muharram Majlis program, that's upstairs in the 5th floor, just to let people know. Thank you for coming in and out. And then for those of you who are sitting kind of towards the doors, if you see people come in, right now we're in the month of Muharram also, right? And for our Shia community, in particular, there are gatherings that commemorate the tragedy of Karbala, which also in the Sunni narrative is something that is very much there and embedded. And if you are a Sunni Muslim, you're doing yourself a disservice if you don't know what the tragedies were that took place at Karbala, where people killed the family of the Prophet, and in particular, the grandson of the Prophet, Imam Hussein, radiallahu anh. And that's like a very important thing that you should know and like reflect on also. But if you're here for those gatherings, those are upstairs. And As people come in, that's going to be going till around 9 also. You can just like let people know in case they're mistaken, because for a lot of people it's also their first time here, and they might assume that it's taking place in this. It was for years they were doing it in here, and that gathering has also grown a lot, and so they're in the room on the 5th floor of the grand hall. Yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts on like this belonging piece before we move on? Yeah.
I was just thinking about that first time. I forget what it is, and even like I think about this in like college or whatever, without biodiversity, things would not like ecosystems won't be able to sustain themselves. And this is the intelligence of the laws of design. So I was thinking, yeah, we're not meant to be like in a formal thing of being.
What do you mean by biodiversity for just all of us to be in your head for a minute?
Like you can't just have one tree. Like it won't. They'll either like consume each other's resources or do this, that, and the third.
Yeah. You need diversity, right? If you ever go on these like spiritual seclusions that Sam does in our community, we've done 2 so far. I did one with him in Central Park, and then he did another one with Dr. Madwa. One of the things he said when we were in Central Park was like, no tree looks like another tree. And maybe you all know that, and I'm just like stupid. But I looked around and I was like, man, no tree looks like any other tree. And I had never really looked at trees like that before. Do you know? It's crazy. Okay, so where we move forward, 3 days after Hamza radiallahu anh converts, Umar ibn al-Khattab converts to Islam. And this creates now a pivotal moment in the prophetic biography, the Seerah. Umar ibn al-Khattab, when we think about him quite often, or we hear a story about him, or a hadith about him, or an experience of him, it is something that has like a lot of impact. Do you know? You don't necessarily assume that Umar radiallahu anh enters into a narrative and there's not some learning that you can take from it, that there's not something that's about to happen. Like, you know, he's there for a reason. You want to preface what we're going to talk about today within a couple of different frames. One, there's a hadith where the Prophet says, لَوْ كَانَ نَبِيًّا بَعْدِي لَكَانَ عُمَرٌ, that if there was a Nabi after me, a prophet after me, it would be this man Umar. That's like a big station. You understand? Because nobody thought he could even be Muslim based off of who he was prior to his conversion. And even the day he converted, we're going to talk about it, people didn't know. They were like, oh man, he's here. What are we going to do? لَوْ كَانَ نَبِيًّا بَعْدِي لَكَانَ عُمَرٌ. If there was a Nabi after me, it would be this man, Umar. He walked through a lot of things and did a lot of stuff that if we met people like this, a lot of Muslim communities would not be opening their doors to people like that. But a lot of us have either been in this situation where we have turned a lot of Umars away, the same way we said, we turn a lot of Hamzas away, or we buy into the mindset that people have of us. What would happen if Hamza radiallahu anh decided that night that I'm just going to tomorrow tell people I didn't really mean what I said to Abu Jahl when I said I became Muslim, I follow my nephew's religion? What would have happened? What would fundamentally have happened if Umar ibn al-Khattab was not Muslim and he bought into the perceptions people had of him and his self-esteem was attached to that understanding of self? Umar's mother was from the Banu Makhzum clan, and Umar's father was from the Banu Adi. We haven't talked about the Banu Adi as of yet. We've talked about other clans, right? The Banu Taym, we talked about Banu Hashim, like clearly. Banu Adi is like a small clan, not necessarily super large or a lot going on, but we talked about Banu Makhzum. Does anybody remember when and why we talked about Banu Makhzum? Why do you think we talked about them? Who is part of the Banu Makhzum clan? Is that how you remember?
No, I'm just like, oh my gosh, I forgot.
Who is? Banu Makhzum.
No, not that much. Okay.
Was it his nurse?
Huh?
The person who nursed the prophet?
The person who did what?
Nursed the prophet?
Banu Makhzum. Abu Jahl is part of the Banu Makhzum
Oh
clan,
yeah,
right?
the pharaoh.
Umar ibn al-Khattab's mother is the niece of Abu Jahl, which means that Abu Jahl is considered to be the uncle of Umar ibn al-Khattab, right? It's not like a small relationship, because who's Abu Jahl? Abu Jahl is the tormentor of the Muslims. He hates Islam. Umar ibn al-Khattab, when we talk about his physical stature, the way he carries himself, just like how large and massive of a person he was, Abu Jahl is just like that. They have a similar stature, right? There's narrations that tell us, like when Umar would sit on a mount, sometimes his feet would touch the ground because of how large he was, right? Like if you've ever sat on a horse before, or like a camel or anything, you know, like that's a very hard thing to accomplish. Do you know what I mean? Especially for me, right? Maybe not for you. But Umar going on this thing and his feet are touching the ground. His toes are touching the ground. Do you know? He's a very large human being. Abu Jahl is similar. Why is that an important thing to understand? Beyond the link now of tribalism, that this is his elder, they're of the same clan through his mother, right? And they have that relationship. When you have similarity to somebody, don't like people tell you all the time? Do you know? The number of people who see my kids and they're like, wow, they're getting so big. It's like, yeah, that's what humans do, right? They are not going to be what they were when they were 2 years old for their entire life. And they're like, they look like you. Thank God they look like me. Do you know? If they look like somebody else, that'd be strange, right? But it's a common thing, you know, and you hear it a lot. And then when you're in a place like, oh, you look like your mom, you look like your dad, or, you know, my mom likes to tell my daughter that she's beautiful. And my daughter says to her, because everybody tells my mom that my daughter Medina looks like her. So my mom will tell my daughter, oh, you know, Medina, you're so beautiful. And then Medina is now 11. She's kind of more clever than she should be. And she's like, Daddy, you only say that because you want me to say, you want to say that I'm beautiful because you're just saying somehow that you're beautiful. Right? But when you have those connections, especially at like a generation in between, a grandfather's relationship to a grandchild is not the same as a father's to a child. You know, you could have a father who is very aggressive to a kid, and then when that kid has a kid, that father is super kind to the grandkid. And you're like, what happened? And what about me? Like, you didn't treat me the way you treat my child, you know? It's just different, a different level of softness. So they are similar, right? Fatima radiallahu ta'ala anha, they said she was of the most of the companions, she resembled her father the most. They called her Abiha, the mother of her father. Mannerisms replicated. You see what I mean? They had a close connection that you want to think about because Umar is about to turn his back on this man and his tribe, his clan. His father, Khattab, right? Umar ibn al-Khattab. So his father, Umar is the son of al-Khattab, right? His father, al-Khattab, was just known as being like an abusive person. Umar's in his 20s. And in different narrations, he talks about how his father treated him very harshly. Umar's father also has lineage to Nufail. And we've talked about a man a couple of times whose name is Zayd ibn Amr ibn Nufail, whose son, Sa'id ibn Zayd, asked the Prophet, my father, Zayd ibn Amr ibn Nufail, started to preach this religion before you, he died before you start to preach this religion, what's going to happen to him, right? And the Prophet says, we've talked about it a lot, so we don't have to build it up, but he says, your father is going to stand on the day of judgment as a nation unto himself. Right? He's not standing behind anybody. His father was Hanif. Sa'id ibn Zayd, who is the son of that man, Zayd ibn Amr al-Nufail, who is a common person in the ancestry that links them. Al-Khattab used to abuse Zayd ibn Amr ibn Nufail when he was telling people like about monotheism. Sa'id ibn Zayd, he marries Fatima, who is the sister of Umar ibn al-Khattab. Right? All of these things converge. You see what I mean? Umar's father abused him. Just like he abused a lot of people. And that's important to understand for a couple of reasons. One, boys can be abused also. We work with a lot of survivors of abuse. When you're thinking about a man who is strong and big enough that when he sits on a horse or a camel, his feet could touch the ground, you're not necessarily thinking, when that guy was a kid, his father mistreated him. People have invisible wounds, right? You think about the transformation of Umar radiallahu anh through Islam. He had the absence of a good father, and Allah gives him the Prophet of God as a healing variable and an example of what a good man actually is, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he now shifts. The gross majority are still women, nonetheless, who are survivors of abuse. But men can get abused also. Understanding and recognizing things about him and who he is and why it's important, and to understand it, because it's not me or someone else or like a lecture that we listen to from an entertainment standpoint, but educationally, you want to sit and reflect on this idea. لو كان نبيا بعدي لكان عمر. If there was a Nabi after me, it would be this man Umar. One of the jobs that he had growing up was that he was a shepherd. The Prophet was a shepherd. Every prophet, we're taught, was a shepherd at some point. Umar was also a shepherd of various animals, but taking care of this as a part of his socialization. The same way we went into it in detail months ago, talking about why part of the Prophet's training included him being a shepherd. Umar was also a shepherd. He experiences what any young man experiences in that time, and is known for his ferocity, his sheer size. Nobody messes with him. But he has some distinct characteristics that start to surface because he's still only in his 20s. And we're talking about this in lunar years, not in solar years, right? The Gregorian calendar is different from the Islamic calendar. Muharram is the first month on the Islamic calendar. We don't really have like a Happy New Year type culture. That's not what Muharram invokes. But the understanding is that a year ago, in comparison to the Gregorian calendar, this month of Muharram was 11 days later in comparison. It's shifting 11 days earlier every year. So you do the math, to be somebody in your 20s, you're still in a place where consciousness, wakefulness is a lot different than when you're 40 or 50 or 60. And he is only at a certain place in terms of emerging adulthood, right? Think about whatever phase of life you're in right now and subtract 5 or 10 years from it. Where are you at from where you were in terms of your mental capacity, what you could understand about certain things? So Umar definitely tormented Muslims, But in his initial engagement, he didn't really pay too much mind to what was going on. The challenge that came up for him was that he loved his people very deeply. And it wasn't a clan-based love. He wasn't, I got to protect the Banu Adi, nor was he the Banu Makhzum. He was very much so about like Quraysh and its customs, Quraysh and its ways, Quraysh and our society. And this new thing that's coming in, it's making a mess of all of this. It had a different intentionality than some of the other people that were also against what was taking place. Abu Lahab, Abu Jahl, they had different motives and motivations. When Umar ibn al-Khattab is in these places, he is exposed now in different ways. One of his own narrations speaks about the relationship he had to drinking. And there wasn't a lot of nights that he did not drink alcohol. And in one way, can you guys turn him this way? Qibla is this direction. Yeah. Sorry, man. Yeah. We don't pray to the arch. Umar, radiallahu anh, before he became Muslim, he tried to go find people to drink with. In one narration, he talks about it. He said the hour was very late. He's a man in his 20s, right? Hamza, we said, who's older than the Prophet, is in his 40s, late 40s, right? So the discrepancy, I'm a 41-year-old man. I am not a 21-year-old man. I don't know if my mannerisms are of what age, right? But understand there's a categorical difference. He's trying to hang out the way a 20-year-old would hang out. The hour is very late. And as the hour is very late, he can't find people to go do this with. So he says, I'm going to go find a tavern and just buy something to drink on my own, right? But it's too late that he can't even find a tavern to go buy something to drink. So now he can't drink. He says, I'm going to go to the Kaaba and worship in whatever way he understood worship to be. And he's astonished because when he gets to the Kaaba, he's going to assume it's empty because nobody's going to pray late at night. They're all getting hammered. And what he finds is that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is there. And at that time, the Qibla was in what direction? To Al-Aqsa, right? May Allah free Al-Aqsa in our lifetime. And so he's facing towards Al-Aqsa, but has positioned in front of him the Kaaba. Because when you go to Mecca, you can pray in any direction, right? And fun fact, if you are praying inside the Kaaba, then you can face any way you want to, you know? So he's praying towards Jerusalem with the Kaaba in plain sight. And as he's praying and he's reciting, Umar ibn al-Khattab is in a place where nobody's there. And because nobody's there, that means he can also do whatever he wants to. And so what the narrations tell us is that Umar ibn al-Khattab, he's in a place where he is positioning himself within the cloth of the Kaaba so that he can essentially come and surprise and seemingly attack the Prophet of God. The Prophet ﷺ is reciting from Surah Al-Haqqa. And Umar says that he is hearing these words and he's never heard anything like this before. One of the things you want to know about Umar is that he knew how to read and write. A lot of people at that time did not know how to read and write. When you think of a man who is known for his ferocity, whose feet can touch the ground when he sits on a horse, who can carry a sword on his neck like a necklace without it damaging him in any way, are you thinking that he's a learned person? Are you thinking that he might have been abused by his father? Why don't you think these things? Right? The same way we make assumptions about people's intellectual capacities based off of skin color, based off of dress, based off of degrees that they've harnessed. That's not what gives people the ability to be intelligent. That's what oppressive systems want you to believe about people. Do you know? Omar's poetry was so profound that the way people have ciphers today. People know what a cipher is? Yeah? Right? What's a cipher? You're nodding your head.
The ones that I know about, they go there and they get together to either perform poetry or rap about it.
Yeah. People are having rap battles. They're freestyle, right? Has anybody ever done that before?
Oh, God, no.
You've done it?
Oh, I said, oh, God, no.
Oh, God, no. What? Does anybody here know how to freestyle? You do? Really? You want to do something for us right now?
Oh, no.
For my students on Fridays.
What?
Oh, my God.
It's called Freestyle Friday.
Where do you do that?
I'm at the high school at Seerah.
You
Oh.
every Friday freestyle for your students?
For 8 years.
Yeah.
Oh.
You did it for 8 years and you won't do it for us for a minute right now?
It's just humorous and I'd rather not.
You're the worst. So Umar ibn al-Khattab, he essentially engaged in the ciphers of his time. And they utilized poetry, which is essentially what rap is, right? The opportunity to understand, though, that he has facets to him that you cannot just be simplistic and intellectually lazy. لو كان نبيا بعدي لكان عمر. If there was a Nabi after me, it would be this man Umar. You think the Prophet is saying this about him just because his feet touch the ground when he rides on a horse? No, there's got to be other stuff about this man that would give him the capacity that the best of creation is saying, if there was a prophet after me, it'd be this man. So he's hearing the verses of Surah Al-Haqq being recited. You want to recite for us a little bit, man? Can you recite this? If you want to get yourself ready, like in a few minutes. Yeah? Al-Haqqa, Mal-Haqq, wa ma adraka Mal-Haqqa. Right? Until these verses. Yeah? Before we wrap up. Or maybe in Maghrib you can read them.
It's just 3 verses and you said it.
No, but when he gets to the point where he's talking. So what happens, right? This isn't what throws him off. Do you know? So Omar is hearing him recite these verses. And he's in a place where, like, he's saying, this guy is a great poet. But then the verse is recited that says he's not a poet. This isn't poetry. And Omar is saying he must be like a soothsayer. He's this and that. And the verses are responding to his thoughts. And Omar doesn't know what's going on. Do you understand? But you have to see how the experience in and of itself is a process. Do you know? He is being still exposed to things, and sometimes it's not with the immediacy that we seek. It takes a little bit of time for someone to get there. Do you hear what I mean? So this is impacting him. On another occasion, a woman by the name of Layla, she is getting ready to go on this migration, right? And she's preparing herself. Umar ibn al-Khattab sees her, and she is asked, like, what are you doing? Where are you going? They don't really have, at this point now, the anxiety that they had prior to, right? Who is the first martyr in Islam? Sumayya radiyallahu ta'ala anha. When you experience that kind of loss, it's not just a story. What do you think ripples through their community at the reality of her martyrdom? This is serious business. They took her life. What would happen if they came to me for mine? Umar ibn al-Khattab is this man who is physically large enough that his feet can touch the ground when he is on a mount. She doesn't back away from the conversation, does she? Where are you going? You all have made it hard for us to worship our God here. We are going into the land where we can worship him freely. Omar's intention of combating the Prophet is what? He doesn't want to have this society be broken apart. And now he hears from a woman that you're making us leave our home. He's in his 20s, right? I don't know how old most of you are. I have to get accustomed to the fact. I started working when I was 22 years old, right? I am now 41 years old. I'm turning 42, inshallah, in October.
Inshallah.
It's very different, like 20 years later. But I still work with people across various backgrounds. I can't have the expectations of an 18-year-old that I would have of a 38-year-old. Do you know what I mean? So Omar is in his 20s, and he is still in this place where he's trying to figure out things that a 20-something-year-old is trying to figure out. So he has to come to a place of recognition. She is saying, Abdullah, Layla, that this is why we're leaving. And he's got to digest, I am the reason she's leaving her home. I contribute to this. So to her astonishment, he says, go have peace on your journey. She goes to her home and tells her husband, a man by the name of Amr. And he says, what are you talking about? You sound as if you think Umar, the son of Al-Khattab, could become Muslim. Because she says that he was very sorrowful. He seemed hurt, what it was that was happening. And she says, why couldn't he become Muslim? And he famously says, the donkey of Umar's father will become Muslim before he does. Nobody thought this man could become Muslim, right? This opponent of Islam, he was beating people, beating women, right? Struggled with substance, all kinds of things. And he's also in his 20s. It's not that he's this grown man, Abu Jahl, Abu Lahab, but it's a lot easier to see the inadequacies in those that are younger than you. The Prophet uniquely sees something different. Allahumma izz al-Islam bi habba rajalani ilayk Amr ibn Hisham or Umar ibn al-Khattab. That, oh Allah, bring some izzah to Islam by the one of the two men who is more beloved to you, Amr ibn Hisham, who we know as Abu Jahl, or Umar ibn al-Khattab. And the dua is answered, Umar ibn al-Khattab. But we want to just reflect for a minute on this occasion to be able to understand. If it was Abu Jahl and this woman was in front of him one-on-one, do you think he would have said to her, go and have peace on your journey?
No.
Why is Umar ibn al-Khattab saying this? And what does it tell us about who he is in that moment, his nature, his capacity for change? Do you see the distinction in the two individuals? If you come to the hadith class, we talked about Abdullah ibn Umar, who is the son of Umar ibn al-Khattab. And Abdullah ibn Umar, whose father became the second caliph of Islam. Under his khalifa, the community expands greatly. He's of the Ashara Mubashara, the 10 guaranteed paradise. He's of the Khulafa Rashidun, the 4 rightly guided caliphs. His son Abdullah doesn't want anything to do with politics, right? Abdullah is different from his father. Umar is different from his uncle. They're individuals. You are not somehow just an extension of the people that came before you, nor are those who are going to come after you somehow supposed to be replications of who you are. I don't want my son and my daughter to be me in some weird validation of myself, right? I just want them to be the best version of who they can be. Nothing in this religion tells us that you are supposed to be or you are doomed to be like those that came before you. Abu Jahl, from what we know of him, would likely have treated this woman differently. Umar, he has an opportunity to again unleash whatever he could, because who's going to do anything to him? But he says no. And one of the themes that we've talked about in the Seerah is when you are dealt now with genuine, sincere interactions, convictions. Oh, uncle, if they put the sun in my right hand, the moon in my left, I still couldn't top this, right? Abu Talib says to his nephew, like, keep going. I'm with you. He can't doubt his conviction. Abdullah, Layla, she sees now Umar ibn al-Khattab, experiences it in its most raw of forms, and says, maybe there's something in this guy's heart. Maybe there's potential there. And then immediately it's shut down. But you want to make these connections that there are still characteristics that we are seeing that give us an indication potentially as to why Umar was more beloved of the two that the dua is being made for. He didn't move instinctively. He stopped and reflected on what he was contributing in this moment. Does that make sense? Okay, let's take a pause for a second. You can turn to the person next to you. What are you taking away so far? And then we'll come back and discuss. But go ahead.
Like, even the worst people like smart, they can change.
Yeah.
It's not having like there's a Chinese person living in Puerto Rico. There's a guy called me.
I know.
So maybe he
I know.
did some mistakes that maybe we are there to go to the like
I know.
like some better. I'm just like cracking me up like so
No,
hard.
like when I get so like in my own head, I don't even know what I'm
Like it's so hard to imagine that's not.
Yeah.
It was like if you say you behind it, but it's like
Absolutely not.
hard to yeah. Like
Never just sit here and whatever you want.
Yeah.
So like all we got like literally they would teach me out of my planning like younger and now. And I just have a very understanding that I always have like a very bad story and it was very specific and he was fun and then he changed. And I always love his stories because I love the idea of change years yeah. Afterwards, then I didn't say. I my understanding. That's what it is now. But it's it was that like since he was like drinking all that so he had that one having so much success maybe that was like he just turned out like to be like yeah so
trying to talk about the person that's probably like he likes himself maybe of course so great but the person is the best person who can be in me is possible. Right away. Like say that we're making just like I don't know, like that's something that maybe
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
take them in a way that yeah, that's right. Like everyone has the equal responsibility. Yeah. No matter how it's
Like compared to like, especially in this country, the people not to have interviews in there, they don't grow up with special needs or learn like that. Like it's way younger than like so this is way young. But anyways, no, there's this thing where it's like I think like and I just other way, especially when they extra yeah, exactly. Why not? Why not? I don't blame anyone.
Okay, what are some of the things
Yeah.
that are coming up? What are we taking away so far? Maybe we can get a couple of people. What did we discuss?
I don't think it is up to us as a creation to decide who will Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will open the heart of open their heart to Islam. Just like Umar al-Hattab, like as the Amr radiallahu anhu has said, like, oh, he's done, like his uncle's done to you. I mean, his father's done to you. Will become Muslim first before he becomes Muslim. So it's like a lot of times, especially nowadays, it's like we are so quick to judge, like who is more Muslim and who is less Muslim based on the, as you said, the characteristic, the way we wear certain clothes or the way how we speak. But it is the relationship between Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and this individual that we don't know, that is hidden from us. So I think that's a good takeaway from today, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah. Other thoughts?
I think like also like given the story, we shouldn't we don't have to burden ourselves with the notion of being perfect. Like we can understand that human beings are not homogenous, and everyone is going through their own struggles in their own way, and we can't judge others or judge ourselves and put other people on pedestals and downgrade yourself if you feel like you're not fulfilling your most. It's all about time and timing and reflecting and what happens on its own.
Yeah, and if you take it to like a deeper concluding point, what are we learning about how we relate to Allah versus Allah's creation from this understanding? Of adab? Yeah. What else? Yeah.
It reminds me of the life in autobiography of Malcolm X, because I actually was kind of interesting. Earlier this week I was talking to someone and I said, we were just discussing how Malcolm X's his personality and his life reminds me a lot of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu. And read the autobiography, it's like he talks about his life before prison and he was involved, the things he was involved in. But he always slips and I knew Allah was with me. this point. I know Allah saved me from this. Kind of interesting how he, the beautiful how he does that. But then, just like post-prison and then like Nation Islam, but then from Nation Islam, Orthodox Islam, and then he's martyred, and he's become, and from where he started to like where his life ended and beyond that, he's one of the greatest symbols of Islam in the United States specifically, but also like globally. And how many people have converted to Islam, not just black Muslims, but like even like white Muslims, basically other people have just found Islam, his autobiography, and so and in his autobiography, it seems like people kind of gave up on him. They didn't think he wasn't going to do anything in life, and even his own siblings had opinions about him, but. So like remind me of like just in our time, like it's just like that reality of like people like Sayyidina Umar or like people, the Sahaba. It's reflected again and again like in our own context and people that we know, people that we read about.
Yeah, right. What people think of you is not the end goal. Just because someone likes you does not make or break the situation. And more importantly, someone's displeasure in you is not the variable that indicates Allah's pleasure with you. You know? The whole world could be in a place where they don't see anything good in you. You don't want to adopt the mindset. What would have happened if Umar believed people's perceptions of him? Self-esteem is twofold. How you see yourself, and in turn, how you treat yourself based off of how you see yourself. There's different modes through which we can understand the self. There's how I see me, there's how you see me, there's how I want you to see me, and then there's who I actually am. Right? If he buys into what it is that's people's worst misconceptions, or on the other end, what people's like best conceptions of him are. Right? You sat down with Abu Jahl, he would tell you, Umar is great. He's the best. But that capacity can only be reached when a recognition of what validation actually is. Who cares what people think if you get up to go pray while you're at work? Why are they the determining variable of your goodness? Why is it that no matter where you are from, you are always from somewhere else, but there's some people, whether they're in America or in Europe or in Canada or in Australia, they're exactly where they're supposed to be? Why is it that you always have to have a reason or explanation as to why you do what you do? Why don't you eat in this month? Why do you dress this way? But there's some people who, regardless of what they do, they always are doing what's the norm. They don't ever have to explain it. You are built into a system that requires you to doubt yourself and seek validation from the system that was built to oppress you in the first place. Break out of it and let yourself just submit to Allah, who looks for a reason to accept from us, not looks for a reason to push us away. Umar is telling you in his own story that he used to drink in the late hours of the night. He couldn't find people to drink with. He tried to find a tavern to drink alone. He's in a place where he was the staunchest of enemies. But our prophet said he would be the prophet after him if anyone was a prophet. You don't want to be pushing people away, nor do you want to let yourself be pushed away. It's a twofold challenge. Don't see just from simplicity, think from a little bit of depth. This is what the husn of the Prophet did. His innate beauty allowed for him to see where someone had beauty within and then empower them through that and put them in the right positions. Everybody is not supposed to be the person that leads the prayer. Everybody is not supposed to be the person that is like giving the dars. Everybody is not supposed to be a doctor. You don't want me performing your surgery. That doesn't make any sense, right? But if it's humorous, why do you have this expectation that everybody's supposed to fit in exactly in the same way of offering something? It's not supposed to be homogenous. If all of us were doctors, then who would be farming the land? Right? And then where does nobility come from? When you buy into systems that give you hierarchical understandings or stratified settings of success, you don't think as goodly about the person who vacuumed the carpet that you're about to pray on as you do the person who has like some other kind of degree. Why? Why would you not want your child to marry the person who vacuums the places of prostration? Like, why? And I'm not saying that you should or should not. I'm just asking you to think about why. Where does your understanding of somebody's goodness and worth come from? Because if you can start to understand why you see others the way that you do, you're going to start to also see why you see yourself the way that you do. You don't pursue the degree that you pursue because you have passion or an intention for the sake of God. You think you're lesser of a human being if you don't have that. But our religion doesn't teach us that. And when you can embrace it for what it is, then you don't have to pursue what has limited perspective. Do you see what I mean? Don't buy into the mindset that keeps you from meeting who you can potentially be, but also don't put people in a box that they're bigger than. It doesn't make any sense. We don't want to push Umars away. We want to bring them close. We don't want to push Hamzas away. We want to bring them close, right? Does that make sense? Umar radiallahu an, he is now in a place where after Hamza radiallahu an has become Muslim, the Quraysh get together and they say, we have to kill Muhammad. It's a shift, like a drastic shift. Nobody has said it. The basis as to why they now shift in the strategy is not necessarily defined. But when people like Hamza are becoming Muslim, it's a tipping point. There's a shift that's there. And when they can see now the influence that people of influence have, especially when they're being utilized properly, right? It doesn't make sense. It's against the Sharia to make creation live unnatural to its way of existence. A chicken was not made to eat chicken. Do you know? You and I were made to eat it. We can eat chicken if we want to. Do you know what I mean? But chickens should not eat chicken, right? But some people make chicken eat chicken. This is haram. You can't do that. It's unnatural. There's certain things that just don't make sense because you're trying to fit into a rigid archetype of what a good Muslim can do when they offer back. But like, sometimes you just got to be you, man. You don't have to be the person next to you. And so when Hamza comes and it creates now a mode of different notoriety, and a lot of other people were going to start following suit, what can we do? Let's just go kill him. Umar ibn al-Khattab, I'm going to be the one to do it. Sword comes out. He's on his way, literally, right? And you want to think about it. Because the same way we think about Umar, when we hear him in a story, we think of a large man who is built muscular with physical stature. We're not thinking about Umar the poet. We're not thinking about Umar, the one of the few who could read and write. We're not thinking about Umar, who when a woman challenges him and puts him in his place, he actually takes it. So these people also think a donkey will become Muslim before he does. You see him walking down the street with a sword in his hand. What are you going to think? Get out the way. A Sahaba by the name of Nu'aym, who is also from the Banu Adi. And who is the Banu Adi? They are the clan of Umar's father. And they are good friends. He sees what's about to happen. And Umar does not know that Nu'aym has become Muslim. Because a lot of people are secret Muslims at this time, right? Because they don't want these guys to come and literally kill them. So he says, where are you going? What's about to happen? When he finds out that he's on his way to kill the Prophet, he now deters him and says, well, maybe you should take care of your own house before you go into somebody else's house. And Umar says, what do you mean? He tells him that Fatima, radiallahu ta'ala anha, his sister, not the daughter of the Prophet, but Fatima, who is the sister of Umar ibn al-Khattab, she has become Muslim. So Umar, goes and shifts routes and is now on his way to her home. When he's outside the house, he hears three voices. He hears the voice of Fatima, of Sa'id ibn Zayd, who is the husband of Fatima, and he hears the voice of Khabab ibn Arat, right, who we talked about. And on a later occasion, Umar sees him barebacked, scars and blisters, because when they were persecuted, Khabab, who has no protection, they would lay him bareback on a bed of flaming coals and was made to stay there till the blood from his back extinguished the flames. So Umar ibn al-Khattab knocks on the door. Khabab ibn Arat disappears. Because if anybody's going to get hurt in this tribalistic system, it's not going to be the sibling or the sibling's husband. They're going to go after the guy who's got nobody. So when he engages in the conversation, Fatima is now standing again towards him. They know, these guys are capable of killing us because Sumayya radiallahu ta'ala anha has been martyred. They know it. They know what they're going through in Gaza. They know what it means to stay there and what's going to happen. They know it. And they still are praying Jummah, right? They're still doing their stuff. You know what I mean? May Allah end the occupation that's taking place there. Make us a generation that witnesses a free Palestine in our lifetime. But think about it. They're living in reality. So she knows the potential consequences. The hadith goes into a lot of different detail as to what it is that's transpiring until Umar strikes his sister. And in that moment, she still engages, and he comes to a place of realization of the harm that he has caused to his own family member. As they are in this experience now together, they have a moment where he has clarity. She can sense the clarity in him, an openness to be able to actually listen. And so he asks, what is these things that you're reading, right? And she says, you're not clean enough to engage these. Go wash up the way we wash up for it. Do you know? And they read verses from Surah Taha. If we had more time, we would look at those today. You want to go read these verses of Surah Taha and see where Umar ibn al-Khattab stops in verses as he's reading them that get to a point that says essentially he's worshiping Allah and that Salah has been established for the remembrance of Allah, right? Read them and try to experience them. And as Umar is reading through these verses of Surah Taha, he says, I've never read something like this before, right? But he tells them in that moment, show me these things. And then when he reads it, he says to them, is this what he is teaching you? He doesn't even know what he's fighting against. Most people don't even know it. This man makes a complete 180 as he reads it for the first time. Aside from an entire community that has no exposure to this because you're scared to live the best gift that you've been given. You can't share something with somebody that you don't have in the first place. If Umar's heart can be impacted by reading the Quran with openness, what do you think it'll do to your heart if you read it? You got to read it. You got to engage it and let it be something that you actually become open to submitting to. And he does this and it's transformative. They send him to Dar al-Arqam. What's Dar al-Arqam? What's Dar al-Arqam? It's the place where the Muslims gather, right? This the house of Al-Arqam ibn Abi al-Arqam, right? The young man who inherits this house. It's their community gathering place. And they do it in secrecy. Umar ibn al-Khattab is directed that way, and they send him there. Khabab ibn Arad, Sa'id ibn Zayd, and Fatima bint al-Khattab. But nobody knows, and he's still got his knife. He knocks on the door, and they're frightened. They don't know what's about to happen, but also nobody has come and invaded their house before. Like, this was their safe space, and now of all the people who knows what their safe space is, it's Umar ibn al-Khattab. And they're freaking out, and Hamza says, like, what is wrong with you? So what if it's Umar ibn al-Khattab? And he says if he does something that is, like, pleasing to God, then that's great. And if not, like, I will kill him with my own sword. Do you know? But it's like matter of fact. Do you know what I mean? There's no hesitation. How many days was it from when Hamza converted to when Umar converted? 3. They don't know what it's like to have a Hamza in their midst. They're still getting accustomed to this. That, oh yeah, like we got this guy. They don't know. They're used to just being in survival mode. Why is this important to understand? And we'll talk about it more next time. Muslims are trying to just survive today. That's all you're trying to do. That's all we're trying to do is just survive. You don't have to just survive. They didn't go through what they went through, so we're just surviving. You have to be bold enough to build what you have the ability to build and not find complacency and like, oh, I got this thing. That's great. What are you doing for people who are going to come later? They didn't go through what they went through so that you had to retreat and regress back to a survival mode. Hamza was there, so it shifted. You got to shift back to that place and recognize that amongst you are the Sumayyas and the Hamzas and the Umars that we need. And then elevate what it is that is the growth trajectory. So everything is not like the same conversation every single time. You cannot have the same Ramadan every year going forward anymore. It doesn't make any sense. Look at the state the world is in. What it's missing is you actually embracing change and being transformative in the application of your faith. Stop just engaging in rhetorical, academic, intellectual conversations, and after you pray Maghrib, go keep being Muslim when you leave from the building. But not a myopic understanding. They're all being themselves and bringing the best of themselves to the experience. When he walks into the room and he like converts to Islam, we'll talk about it in more detail next time, but this is what happens. He walks in and he takes his shahada. Nobody thought he could be Muslim. Nobody. Right? And his Islam was necessary for the tide to shift. This is why I tell you almost every Friday, say salams to people that you know and you don't know. It's not just for like the fun of it. You don't know how many people are showing up here and looking for somebody to be the reason that they come, and then they are what we need for this thing to just blow up in a way that it just doesn't stop the positivity. You don't know. You don't have to be the one that has that capacity. You just work within your own capacity. What does it take for you to say salams to someone, to smile at someone, to learn a little bit about them and tell them that, yes, you can have this place with God? I'm going to tell you, for some of you, why you can't do that is because you don't think you can have a relationship with God. How can you give something to someone that you don't possess in the first place? But you become skewed in the understanding of then who Allah is. Every single week, not every day, but still every week, despite the number of people that come here, a regular conversation I have is with people who say, I'm just not good enough. I'm not this. I just feel like I'm destined for hell. You're not destined for hell as much as you can't say I'm going to heaven. We just don't know. But embedded within it, aside from a perspective of yourself, you're telling yourself who you know God to be. If you believe in a God that has already written that you are just going to hell no matter what, why would you want to do anything for the sake of that God? What did they give him? An opportunity to believe that they has a second chance. It doesn't mean that you overlook people's flaws. You have abusive people in your life that are abusing people in their lives. You don't just say, well, everybody can improve. No, man, remove him from the situation that enables him to do the haram that he's doing. And he lost the blessing that was in his life because he didn't treat it with the respect that it was meant to be treated with. You can still have a second chance, but having a second chance doesn't mean that that person lives in misery until you grow up to be the mature person you're supposed to be. I went to the Maldives, and in the Maldives, it's got the highest divorce rate in the world, or it did when I went in 2017, 2018. 2/3 of the country is addicted to heroin. A lot of different stuff going on. And to be a citizen, you have to be Muslim. It's a 100% Muslim country. And a lot of stuff was happening there that I could tell you stories about. But one of the visits I did were to inmates in a high security prison. And I sat down with these people who were drug dealers, murderers, gang leaders, both in the prison and outside of it. But in this prison, I'm sharing with them the story of Umar ibn al-Khattab. Grown men who, when you would see them, you would stereotypically think that they look like people who are in prison. And they're in tears, crying. I said, what's going on? And they said, for years, people from the Islamic ministry of this country, that's a Muslim country, send people here to do rehab with us and other stuff so that we can improve or whatever else. You're the first person who's ever told us that we can have a second chance, that Allah's rahmah can also be applicable to us. This is what Malcolm rahimahullah experiences. A unique opportunity that segues into a universal brotherhood that only Islam offers by centering God, and that's a God that believes in you more than you believe in yourself. So we get to this place that despite people's misconceptions and stereotypes and limited perspective, they can't do anything. Umar became Muslim. He converted, even when nobody else thought he would, except Allah and Allah's messenger. Be like the Prophet. Be like Muhammad. Try to see the best in people and empower them through that. Does that make sense? Okay. We're going to take a pause to pray Maghrib. It's really quickly. What's the date today? The 10th. The first week of August, I'm not going to be here. I think we'll have other programs happening, but just so people can have that as an awareness. And then after July 15th, which is this weekend, the building from next week is going to be open till 9 p.m. and not 10 p.m. because we've been extending it for Maghrib, and the days are getting shorter now. So just so you can anticipate that. Tomorrow there's no programs in the evening here, but our Muharram program that we're doing for our Shia community is taking place every night through the first 10 days and nights of Muharram, the first 10 nights of Muharram, and the 11th night also. We're going to do iftar on the day of Ashura, which is part of the Sunni tradition. On the 10th of Muharram, it's a fasting day for us. And that'll be next Tuesday night. So people want to just make a note of that. I think we're gonna likely do it on the 10th floor of the room next door. We'll have a halakha beforehand, like we did for the day of Arafah, and then we'll have iftar. We'll pray together. So try to come out for that. And then lastly, on Saturday, we're doing a convert brunch at our place. On Jummah, we're gonna have lunch after Jummah, I think this Friday. But on Saturday, we'll have a convert brunch. So if you're a convert, you're exploring Islam, you're a family member of someone in one of those two groupings, the brunch is open to you. Just let me know. I'll send you details if you haven't gotten it already. So let's take a pause here. People can just kind of get ready for Maghrib. We'll call the Adhan and we'll call the Iqama a few minutes after. Assalamu alaikum.